Running Sentences presents All Hail Zip Zog. Part 6. Fireworks. Furious about what's gone on, Rufus heads back for home, trying to figure out what's up and if he wants to do this anymore. But Zip Zog also has his say in the matter. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and incidences within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, real incidents, real situations, real stories, or any fictional ones is of pure coincidence. Copyright 2022, Michael Honore. All rights reserved. Rufus was angrily tapping his fingers against the steering wheel of the car. He wasn't driving angry, but Finn kept looking at him like he was. So he, after catching more than a few glimpses, eased off the gas and tried to relax. Where are we headed? My apartment complex. I need to go talk to my neighbor about Bob, the god. What is this about Bob? Rufus and Finn both nearly jumped out of their skin at the sound of Zip Zog's booming voice. Rufus did his best not to hit the brake pedal as they were on the freeway, and also trying to avoid smashing the gas pedal as well. Finn spun about to see the god. What? Why are there two of you? There are not two of us. Rufus glanced into the rearview mirror to see what Finn was talking about. There were in fact two identical-looking people sitting in the back seat, one of whom was probably Zip Zog, but he could not tell. The sign for a nearby rest area caught his attention, and since he could not keep glancing into his rearview mirror without being distracted, he headed for the rest area while listening carefully. I clearly see two similar people in the back seat. You may not think you look the same, but you look the same. Oh, that's not my problem. You see Bob that's the same as me. Anyway, this is Bob, by the way, and you would not believe how hard it is to get a god out of the safety zone. You wanted to talk to him, by the way. Yes, desperately, and only as long as you promise not to do anything with your godly powers. Oh, fine, I promise not to use my powers. The tires chirped a little bit as he angled for the nearby exit. He went to the rest area, which was right there in front of him, but the faster they got there, the better, Rufus felt. The search for a parking spot was a surprising one, since it felt like every parking space was taken up. Rufus drove around and around, questioning much of everything he knew, because shit had gone to hell, and things no longer made any sense to him. Like the parking lot, which normally would have very few cars and very few people. Yet here he was driving about until a spot finally opened, and he scurried his car into it before anyone else spotted it, as he swore there was definitely another car lurking about in search of a spot. Parked, and with the car now turned off, Rufus unbuckled his seatbelt and spun about to see the two very similar-looking gods. There they sat, looking much the same. Long, scraggly hair, robes that shone brightly, and an aura that said everything was right with the world. This despite the fact that everything felt very wrong to Rufus, especially because it involved Zip Zog being around. Okay, so which of you is which? Zip Zog, who was on the right-hand side of the car, or Rufus's left, raised his hand. It's me, God, Zip Zog, and this is Bob. Zip Zog pointed to the man on his left, who hadn't moved an inch, or even looked alive for that matter. No, he looked more like one of those human dolls that one might take to bed. Does this god named Bob talk? Yes, I do, but not to the likes of you two. Yes, our other problem is that once a god becomes tied to a prophet, they can't communicate much with others. At least that's the way it was in those old rules that we had going on for a little while. Things have changed, but old rules still apply until a god is released from said contract with a prophet, if they made a contract with a human, and so on. What the fuck? Yes, what Rufus said. And what is this about a safety zone and rules? I thought you gods were gods, free to do what you want. Well, you see, after the whole debacle of Greek and Roman gods doing as they wanted, we figured it might be a bit of a good thing to put some limits on our interactions. We cut ourselves off once the Abrahamic stuff started to come out, and it just sort of kept a wall between us and people. Why would you do that? Well, for one, the whole Abrahamic stuff was dreadfully dull. Not nearly as fun as the free-flowing Greek gods, or maybe even the Indian gods sometimes. Anyway, way too many restrictions about this and that, and plus no experimentation is we've just sort of enclosed in on ourselves just to keep things simple. And, it just sort of happened that way, and we're now maybe slightly breaking away from that, to have some more fun and be able to experiment and teach lessons to people. Rufus looked over skeptically at Finn, who didn't seem to be buying any of this as well. It was all nice and good, but it didn't explain much about their problem. You nearly got us pepper sprayed, Zip Zog, by a security cop. And as for you, Bob, you apparently left a prophet to rot as your cult fell apart. Is this what you gods do? Well, yes. Like I just said, we teach lessons to silly humans who think they know things. It's our way of helping you along on the journey of life. And we just do things. Well, Bob still has to answer for why he abandoned George, who happens to be my neighbor. You know where George is. Take me to him now! We will, once we figure out what's going on, and if you will tell us why you gods want a new religion. I already told you to. It's to bring people back into the religious ways of old. Too many have decided what parts of their Bible they like to follow, while ignoring the lots of the other parts. We can't have that. Then why not just strike them down? That'll show them. Yeah, we did try that. They seem to take the wrong message from that. And they continue to postulate that and show that is proof that they are on the right side and not the wrong side. Can we go now? I need to see my prophet! Rufus turned back around in his seat, thinking to himself and then reaching for his door handle. He needed to think more, and if God desperately needed to see their prophet, then they should just be able to show up wherever and whenever they were, shouldn't they? He stepped out of the car and taking in a few deep breaths, trying to clear his mind and his head of all of that was going on. The sound of two doors opening up greeted him as he turned, expecting to see Zip Zog and/or Bob and/or Finn stepping out. He got Zip Zog and Finn. She looked concerned, and Zip Zog looked his usual ambivalent self. I need to think, Zip Zog. Finn, if you would care to join me, and it would be appreciated. He moved away from the car towards the rest station area, with a few bathrooms and vending machines that made up the entirety of the rest area. There was nobody around. That was, except for a small bench that was overlooking a valley. That called to Rufus, who went over and sat down on it heavily. He was shortly joined by Finn, as they sat there looking out at the city that lay just beyond the sightlines of this rest area. The early evening sun pushing its way downward and creating a glow of orange around the skyline. What you thinking about? Where do we go from here? How any of this makes any sense, because we know the second things go wrong, we will be left high and dry by a god or gods or whatever. And why have they chosen me? Why us? Why? Well, religion does need a new reformation. But yeah, I don't see how any of this is possible. Too many different sects and/or beliefs and other nonsense just getting in the way. Exactly, and it would take forever just to visit all of them, and just to get on the right track to figure out where they go wrong and where we need to fix them. It would take ages. And Zip Zog isn't going to believe that. He isn't going to believe anything we say, and the only thing we can do right now is head to George and see what happens. I can drop you off at home if you like, though, along the way. No, I think it would be better for me to stick around, just so you don't get angry at them and get turned into a newt or something. With my luck, I'm kind of surprised I'm not already a newt. She shook her head and she stood up and pulled him along with her. They went arm in arm back to the car, still trying to piece out if they were on the right track or not. The walk back took them only a few seconds, but the sight of Zip Zog standing at the vehicle slowed them. Rufus did his best to steel himself for whatever was going to come from the god. They approached carefully and slowly. "Are you two finally ready to go now?" "Yes, but one thing. Why can't you take Bob yourself and just transport him? You know where my place is, and, well, George's place is right below mine." Zip Zog gave him a rather shocked look and a furious shake of his head no. "Do you know how much gods weigh? It's a freaking lot, man, and moving them about isn't easy." "He can't move himself." "Well, nope. I sort of broke him out of the safety zone so he doesn't get any of the powers granted to him." Yeah, you mentioned the safety zone before. What is it?" It's the area we walled ourselves into to sort of protect gods from humans and humans from gods and so on." Rufus glanced at the god sitting in the car, ignoring all that was going on. For all that he knew, Zip Zog had found some regular person and changed them to look like him, and then dragged him along on this journey. But there was only one way to find out if this was the truth, and he doubted that Zip Zog was going to tell him, even if he insisted on it. "Alright, God, well, let's get going to my apartment building. I don't want to know any more, so I can claim ignorance when the God Police come to take you and Bob away." He headed for the car with Finn trying to hide her grin. "God Police? There are no such thing. Nope, not at all. Wait, did anyone create a religion with a police force that enforces laws on, gods?" "As far as we are aware of, no. But there's always something out there." Zip Zog looked around furiously, just trying to get a sense for something in the air, and he was still sputtering a bit about the God Police as they all got back in. Back on the road, the group had lapsed into silence, which to Rufus was good and bad. It gave him time to think, but it also allowed him time to think. His imagination was stalled out on the idea of police gods running around trying to capture gods that were on the loose, all while silly music played in the background. The drive felt much shorter as a result of this, and they soon arrived at his apartment complex. They parked, and all piled out of the vehicle and headed up to the stairs in a nice, neat, organized line, with them sticking to the right side of the stairs as they clambered upwards, with few people giving them odd looks from the left side. The walkway to George's place was soon upon them, so Rufus led them to the door of his neighbor's place and raised a hand to knock on it, then stopped himself. "By the way, I don't know if he's home, so this might all be for nothing." He turned and knocked on the door. A minute passed before it was opened, and George came out. His neighbor stopped in the doorway and looked over the entire group. "Oh, Rufus, good to see you. And you've brought guests. How nice. Is it about what we were talking about, religious-wise?" "Surprisingly, yes, George, it is." The man nodded and signaled for them all to come inside. They came into an overtly religious living room, with far too many conflicting religious symbols all around the place. Rufus stepped to the side to let everyone in, and stood by with Finn staying by his side. Bob, the god, had charged right in, his fingers glowing as George went to the sofa to sit down. "So, what is all this? What requires all of these people? Are you trying to take me away to the funny farm, Rufus, since I told you all about this religion?" "No, but only because I would probably also be taken away to the funny farm as well. The man to your right is Zip Zog, who is a god, and the other man, Bob, who looks very similar to Zip Zog, who's a little bit on the left, and with glowing fingers, is potentially your god." Bob had marched over to the couch so that he was standing in front of George, with his hand out and fingers pointing towards him. There was a nice bright light shining from the tip of one of his fingers.
"Do you remember me, Gregory?"
"Let me look at you carefully, sir." Gregory got up and began walking around Bob, studying this god figure. This did not sit well with the god, who looked rather annoyed that a human was circling around them, trying to decide if they knew them or not.
"It's Bob, your god."
"Yes, I know many Bobs. Many Bobs."
"The god, the one who helped you create and set up that new religion."
George finally came to a stop and looked at the man carefully, and then with a shrug went back to the couch to sit down again.
"Well, what if you are? What did you expect? Me to remember what you looked like exactly after a couple of decades have passed? I'm an old man. I don't remember much these days." "It's the least you could have done. I'm the one who made you who you are."
The two fell into a quiet staring contest as Zip Zog came over towards Finn and Rufus. While those two are getting to know one another, I've had a brilliant idea." "What is it now, Zip Zog?"
"Blink and you shall see."
Rufus closed his eyes and decided he did not actually want to open them up again. He was going to be somewhere he did not want to be, and leaving Gregory and Bob alone seemed like a bad idea. "Oh, great."
"Oh, it's fine. It will be fine. We need to learn things about how these churches operate and draw people to them. It will be brilliant."
Rufus did not want to open his eyes, and he continued to listen, in hopes that Finn or Zip Zog would say exactly where they were aside from a church. It was a church, that much was obvious. But what kind? "Are you going to keep your eyes closed?" He nodded his head yes.
"We don't have time for games. The afternoon ceremony is about to begin."
"It's one of those mega churches, by the way, Rufus." She grabbed his hand as she said this, and he involuntarily opened his eyes and had to blink. There was a bright sun out, when a second ago it had been dipping low in the sky and casting orange all over the place. His mind decided that was the least of his worries, as it concentrated on the giant behemoth of a glass structure with pointy edges that came out of nowhere, and all seemed to go and be aimed skyward. He let himself get pulled along while trying to figure out if the building looked like it was this way on purpose, or if something evil had overtaken it during the building process. He was pulled into the atrium greeting area, where people passed by and two robed choir boys stood guard to the door into the main church itself. Zip Zog walked up to them, eyeing the whole matter, and the loads of $20 bills that had already been collected and called home in a collection basket.
"Are you three new to our glorious church? Welcome. We haven't seen you around, which is why I asked. We ask that anyone new gives a tithe of $50 for entry into our holy place of worship."
The statement was stunning, and Rufus wasn't sure how he, or Zip Zog, or Finn for that matter, was going to react to it, and was thoroughly surprised when Zip Zog suddenly had a $50 bill in his hand and dropped it into said basket, though he did not look happy as they passed through this door. The blinding light cast its way into the church proper, with all of the glass windows making it hard to see. This, Rufus figured, was only amplified by the fact that the church also had spotlights shining down from up top, down to the stage below, where a pulpit and a throne of a chair sat, cast in light. The trio stepped further into the area, only for another choir boy to step forward, stopping them from entering the aisles. "Excuse me, fine people, do you have a membership to our fine established church of grandness?" They all shook their heads no, and the choir boy pointed off towards the staircase. "The ground floor is for platinum members of the church. Visitors need to head up the stairs, please." Rufus and Finn both grabbed Zip Zog's arms and turned him towards the staircase. The climb up the stairs brought them to a second floor, a mezzanine space with a large sign announcing that gold members of the church could sit in this section. There was another choir boy guarding the way into this mezzanine area.
If you're not a gold member, please continue on to the next level, please.
Finn pulled at Zip Zog, directing him towards the next flight of stairs. The god seemed to be growing redder and redder with each confrontation, and she and Rufus did their best to keep him moving, so any acts of God were not about to be unleashed. Up one more floor to the balcony level. There again they were greeted by a choir boy who merely pointed towards the sign with one hand, and then towards a ladder with his other. Rufus glanced at the sign, barely catching the words, "Silver members only," before corralling Zip Zog towards a ladder. There was no need for any further words to be said. Zip Zog was angry, his feet hitting each rung of the metal ladder with a bit of oomph. He clambered his way slowly upward, with Rufus following him, trying to make sure he didn't put a hand in the wrong spot. The pace was slow because the god's anger seemed to be causing little shocks of lightning to spark every time he moved his hands and legs about the ladder to go upward, and Rufus was catching a few of those shocks on his way.
This is madness. No religion should treat people in such a manner. How do people just go along with this?
Rufus kept his mouth shut and continued to climb, checking to make sure that Finn was following. What could he possibly say to an angry god? Sorry? It wasn't his fault that church was like this. It was also the god's choice to come here, so maybe he should blame himself? The ladder came to an end at a catwalk space high above everything else near the glass windows. Up here, on this catwalk, there was plenty of people, all of them sitting along the edge by a small railing that kept one from falling off from the side. Rufus helped up Finn as Zip Zog went charging off down towards a clear spot, one of the few up here. When they joined Zip Zog in the spot, they could clearly see all that lay before them in this church. It was a massive space, and few, if any, seats on the balcony, mezzanine, or first floor were actually taken up. The lights had all gone down so that they only shone on the stage, and a pulpit with a man in a fancy suit came out, waving his hands in the air. Rufus squinted his eyes as he wasn't entirely sure what was going on. They were high up in the air, and while the man did not look like an ant, he certainly could have been one from up here. This is ridiculous. There are so many people up here and none down there, and I think he's speaking, but the speakers aren't set up here. Zip Zog, can you hear what's going on? He turned to look at the god sitting next to him, who had curled up his lip in disgust and was shaking his head yes. Zip Zog, don't go down there. Don't go all wrath of God and acts of God on the situation. The god, however, was gone, and Rufus could only turn to look down at the stage below. The ant of a preacher, probably a preacher, was being moved about the stage like a rag doll. I think we should get out of here, right? Should we get out of here? I think we should get out of here. Yes, I think we should get out of here. Yeah, I think acts of gods are about to befall this house of God. As he had said this, a glass window shattered from the ceiling, sending fine shards down towards the first floor. It was well away from them, but still close enough to cause problems. As chaos erupted, more glass shattered. The crowd on the catwalk was already up and about, attempting to get at the ladder downward. Since there was only one, it quickly became crowded, and Rufus was swept up in this mess, being pushed along at high speed, only to be slowed down a second later because nobody could get through. What felt like several minutes passed before he found himself near the ladder, and he almost failed to grab at it, and was pushed through the hole in the catwalk down the 20 feet to the balcony floor. Rufus kept an eye out for Finn, but in the mass of people pushing and pulling, and some of them pulling at him, it didn't give him much time to look as he grappled at the ladder rungs, which felt like they were electrically shocking him with every time he touched them in his hands. He kept starting and stopping his movement as he went down, since people were having a hard time being orderly, even on this ladder. Minute upon minute rolled by with the sound of shattering glass still going on as he kept himself going downward, rung by rung. Firm ground came to his feet, but it was at this exact time that what little order was left was being pushed by the wayside by everyone. People on the ladder no longer wanted to wait to get down, and as a result, the tumble of people came down. He jumped out of the way and felt a hand on his arm. "I saw an exit sign over there. We should hurry." Rufus felt a wave of relief move through him at the sound of Finn's voice, and a strong hand pulling him away from the madness. They were not the only ones who had spotted the emergency exit that led to a stairwell. In fact, they were not the first people to even see it. They were not even the first people to the exit doorway, and they were also followed by many people as they made their way there. They found themselves pushed to the side by these people as they tried to get down to the stairs. Rufus held his tongue from yelling at anyone. There was no point, and they weren't going to listen to him. Hell, they'd probably turn around and throw a punch at him if he said anything. So down the many staircases they went, in a hurried silence, with a crowd of people soon greeting them as they reached towards the bottom. This crowd had come to a stop and were not moving, and Rufus did his best to see what was going on. But a sea of people made that unlikely. He peered as best he could from the landing, a floor above the bottom. From what he could see, and wasn't much, it didn't appear to be any doors down there. But he couldn't see from where he was, and there was too many people around, and the feeling of a familiar presence made him turn and look. There was Zip Zog, looking satisfied with himself, and rubbing his hands together as if he'd done a good job with something. Rufus shook his head at the sight, and then looked downward again. "Ah, it has been a good day. So what's going on here? People can't get out? I don't think there's a doorway to get out from here." "Oh, let me fix that." The sudden sound of crushing rock and gasps and cheers suddenly came, and it caused more confusion. And then there was a sudden surge as everyone began moving to get out. With the way clear, everyone got out onto the grounds of the church, which were soon filled with people, cop cars, ambulances, and fire trucks. The mass of people found themselves being tended to quickly, while the guard made himself scarce again. And after a quick checkup by the EMTs and a talk to by a local police officer who took down the briefest of details, and sent them on their way. Rufus and Finn had found their way to the walkway that led up to the church from the road. As they got to this walkway, they could see some EMTs pulling a stretcher out of the church itself. They strolled nearby on the grassy lawn, watching as the stretcher was pulled down this walkway on its wheels, with a very beat-up man trying to raise his thumb to show people that he was all right. "I have met God, and God has blessed me on this day. We will see the world in a new light." The preacher sounded like he was trying to shout the words out, but it was all strangled, muted shout that didn't get very far, and Rufus was pretty sure he was the only one who had heard any of that. He turned away from the side of the man that looked incredibly badly beaten, with black and blue being his new skin color. The two had wandered about a bit more, waiting for Zip Zog to reappear again, as he was their only way home, since they didn't have transportation to get home. The town cop cars and fire trucks said Huntersville, but in a state with a couple of Huntersvilles, one west, one east, and a new one on top of that, it gave them only a vague idea of where they were. But, well, it didn't make it easy, as they were all next to one another, and plus, as far as Rufus remembered, as well as he could, they were on the other side of the state from where they generally lived. And this was an area that they rarely got to, since it was a several-hour drive away. And there was little out here other than nature to draw them to go there, but with life so busy, it rarely provided any time off to go visit nature. A couple of laps around the parking lot left them with nothing to do, and no God to come save them. So the two began walking away from this church that seemed to now be dark and ominous. Their stomachs grumbled as they left, and they quickly found themselves out in this Huntersville town on the sidewalk, heading past a variety of shops. The smells of food coming from nearby drew them even further along the path unconsciously. "Where are you two headed?" "Food."
Food.
Yeah, we're only humans after all. We can't go on and on without some substance to keep us going. Oh, that. Well, I guess I'll join you to see what humans like to eat. Best to know these things firsthand. Rufus shook his head as Finn looked over at him questioningly if this was true or not. Rufus pointed towards a nearby cafe, not wanting to figure out if this god was joking or not. They entered the diner cafe that proudly proclaimed itself to be Poppy's. A host stood at a podium looking rather elderly, yet sprightly. Oh, look at you three. Aren't you simply lovely? Table for three, dearies. The three simply nodded their heads yes, and she had already grabbed 3 menus and was moving towards her right. They were soon headed down towards a table in that direction. Finn, when are we supposed to hear back from that lawyer? What's brought that up? And he said he'd be in touch as soon as he got the contract done. Oh, it's just the thought that the whole church incident will cause my name to pop up in the police log, and the detectives will come looking for me. Oh! Yeah.
Were you 3 dearies caught up in that church thingy incident? Oh, you must be exhausted if you were. I heard it was horrible, and that people were nearly trapped inside. But all were saved thanks to an act of God.
Yes, they were. All praise God, and God loves to hear his praise.
Yes, God is great.
Rufus found himself looking back at Zip Zog, who was now glowing. He tried his best to tune out the weird conversation as they arrived at the table, and he did not want to look at Zip Zog and his glowing self much. The 3 shuffled into the booth with Finn and Rufus on one side and Zip Zog taking up all of the other side. The host plopped the menus in front of them.
Now, dearies, you will be taken care of here, so don't you worry about a thing. Your server will be right around in just a few seconds, and you'll be right and ready to roar out on a Sunday afternoon.
They settled further into the worn cushioned seats. This host was soon gone. Rufus and Finn both picked up their menus while Zip Zog ignored his and stared at them. So what's this about a lawyer I hear you 2 talking about? We went to see one after the business with the building being caught on fire, and Rufus's boss blaming him for the office being caught on fire. Yeah, just in case the cops decided to make life difficult, we figured having a lawyer to stop any such conversations with police from happening would be a good idea. Though, who knows if one can believe lawyers and what they say. It's always an intricate weave of words with them that seem to make them money and results in little else. Yes, that sounds familiar. And they haven't contacted you yet, or we can settle this quickly. I can help out. I'll make sure it's all well and done. Nothing gets by me. I fear that means something will get by, or that you will let something get by, just so that you can have fun, Zip Zog. I would never allow that to happen. Yes, you would. They all quieted down as the server approached, and then they ordered some food and drinks quickly. Rufus found himself unable to relax or really find anything to say as time passed, and they soon had their food in front of them. That too was quickly gotten through, allowing Finn and Rufus to pay for the meal. Before they could get out of the booth, however, they blinked, and Zip Zog smiled, and then they blinked again. In a flash, they found themselves in the law office lobby of Gregorian and Greg and Sons. The secretary looked up from her work, her face instantly clouded at the sight of them. Is there something I can do for you 3? Lawyer, please? Yes, as my meek friends here are trying to explain, we need to see a lawyer they contacted about being their lawyer. Zip Zog took a few steps forward towards the secretary, who seemed rather disturbed, but could not take her eyes away from him. I'm here to hurry this process along. So, kind lady, Miss Secretary, if you could please show us the way. As if ordered, the secretary found herself stood up, and then looked surprised that she had stood up, then opened her mouth to say something, but Zip Zog waved his hand, and she found herself moving right along towards the door. Finn, whose mind finally had gotten back into order after appearing in such a random location, glanced at Rufus. He was coming about as well, and could only shrug as they went in, with the secretary in the lead, though this secretary was throwing constant and furious glances backwards. She seemed unsettled by what was going on, unable to bring it to a stop or do much of anything other than bluster as she went, her jaw doing much flapping without words coming out. But she did get a few in.
"I don't know if he's in, but we can only visit for a second."
They kept going until they arrived at the door of Greg or Ian, with Zip Zog pushing his way in past the secretary. With God in the lead, they all went into this office, with the secretary pushing her way in as well.
"I am sorry, sir. They forced me to bring them to you."
The lawyer, Greg or Ian, stood up and waved her away as he looked them over. Zip Zog came right up to the front of this man's desk and stared at him. "What is this that I hear about a promise contract to protect my friends?" The lawyer glanced over to the door to make sure that the secretary was gone, then looked at Zip Zog and fixed him with a stern look. "Oh, yes? Yeah, you promised my friend Rufus, my prophet, and you have to deliver. Contracts are contracts. You can't renege on these things, you know. I was wondering if you'd recognize me, buddy old pal. It is good to see you." The lawyer suddenly came around the desk and wrapped up Zip Zog in a hug, who equally hugged the man back. Rufus was sure that his head had decided to swim off in some grand imagined vacation, because this made no sense. It made no fucking sense. The two huggers then separated. "What's a demon like you doing out of hell?" "Oh, we take jobs in the human world to help mess things up from time to time. Keeps things interesting and brings souls down to hell from time to time. But what about you, Zippy? How are you out of heaven?" "New religion mandate. We got bored and saw some of our followers were straying from the path." "Is it the born-agains? The multiple marriage ones, or just general ones in this time? The ones that have the mega-churches and fail to follow their chosen path, Greg. It's a terrible, terrible thing." "Oh, those ones are so easy to bring to hell. Really, it is like playing video games on easy mode. It's fun for a while, but then..." "What's a video game, by the way?" Greg or Ian took a step back and looked over Zip Zog with a raised eyebrow. "You really haven't been down here in a while, have you?" "Well, you, my dear demon friend, haven't come up to say hello in a while either." Rufus elbowed Finn gently, and when she looked over, he nodded towards the door. She nodded back, and they quickly and quietly made their escape, trying to go unnoticed. The two made it all the way back to the elevator and aboard it before they relaxed for a second, though they both kept looking around in case their god, or the devil, decided to pop up. "So, do you think that all lawyers are devils, or just a few select ones?" Judging from what Greg or Ian said, probably a select few, but maybe some are more minor devils, and it doesn't make any sense. Well, it does make sense, since most people consider lawyers to be the scum of the earth, vacuuming up money for any and all things that involve the law. "So what are we to do? Is there anything we can do, or are we just going to go along with all of this and hope to survive the mayhem that falls out?" "Well, I was thinking, and can't stop thinking, about what happened at the church. It was a diabolical godly act, and, well, Zip Zog seemed really angry. It seems like that might work for us." "You want to make God angry? Why?" Well, yes, us, but not at us. But at everyone else. Everyone else shall make God angry with how they treat things. But we do have to make sure to not push him too far, otherwise we will probably get caught up in it all. We don't want a bubonic plague and 40 days of floods taking over. Okay, but what exactly are you proposing we do? Rufus pulled a face as the thought of what he was thinking of was not going to go over well. We have to show humanity and how much it's fallen into disarray, how religion is being used to make money from the poor and so on. And then you just hoping and praying he decides that matters are so bad that even God can't fix things. This is starting to sound like a bad idea that gets humanity wiped from Earth. Yeah, now that you put it like that, it sounds terrible. But I also sound like the world's worst prophet, because I am coming up with these ideas. I can't get anyone to join a religion, and it's just going to fail, and maybe, maybe I'm the reason people they won't want to join. Nobody's going to join something because I said so, because I'm a prophet. So I'm not the person that Zip Zog wants, but if Zip Zog's the person who wants me, then, well, it's just, I am going to be zapped or something, or... The elevator had slowed and announced that they'd arrived at the lobby. When the two stepped out, they looked around carefully. There was still no sign of a god or a devil, and they took this chance to sprint across this lobby towards safety. Once in the parking lot of the building, they realized they still did not have a car, and they would not be able to get home just yet. The two looked at one another as Finn began to giggle, as they'd run to get away, even knowing that the god could appear anywhere that they were, and Rufus gave her a bit of a dirty look. Oh, come on, it's a bit amusing that we're going through all of this, only to be stopped because we're so reliant on the one thing that got us here. It's slightly amusing, but nothing else. Okay, Mr. Serious, what shall we do then? Does your phone still have any battery life left to call us a cab, or are we waiting for the person we've been running from? Rufus decided to stick out his tongue at her, and then checked his phone. The battery on his was dead, and he sighed. Mine is dead as well. What are we to do? Zip Zog or... we could do the old-fashioned way, since we are in the city and taxis are still a thing. I think that we can flag down. He headed for a nearby sidewalk, not waiting. Rufus holding his hand out with his thumb firmly up, waiting for any taxi to notice him and come to a stop. Several came by, but none seemed inclined to do the whole stopping bit. Finn decided to follow suit, and it took a minute, but one taxi did come up to them and stopped. She grinned and opened the door for him. Ladies first, since it takes a man to get a taxi to notice them. I've never heard that even from old movies. I know, I made it up. He shook his head at her, and then got in. She followed him in. End of part 6 of All Hail Zip Zog. Thank you for listening.